Bread is a product that people eat all over the world. Whether you eat naan in India or all kinds of delicious French bread in France or tortilla-like products in Mexico, wherever you go, bread is a staple of people's diet. And if you listen to the experts and all kinds of government bodies, they tell you you should eat bread for all kinds of reasons, mostly health reasons. But the question is whether this is true, accurate, or healthy. Just because a lot of people do something or tell you to do something doesn't automatically mean that it's healthy for your body. I'm Ali from Illness Free Life, and in this video you'll learn whether eating bread is actually healthy, what types of bread you definitely should avoid, and if you decide to eat bread, what types of bread you should choose. First, it's good to understand what happens when you eat bread, regardless of the type of bread. When you eat bread, your body will digest the bread into the smallest of smallest micronutrients. But to not make it any more complex than it is, the main thing you need to know about bread is when you eat it, your body digests the carbohydrates in bread, which is the predominant macronutrient in the product, into smaller and smaller carbohydrates or eventually into sugars. And that means that when you eat bread, your body will digest the carbohydrates eventually into sugars, which will end up in your bloodstream, causing you to have a high blood sugar or at least a blood sugar spike. Fortunately, our pancreas is able to neutralize this by producing insulin, which helps with the absorption of all these sugars from the bloodstream into our muscles, our organs, and other bodily cells that use these sugars as fuel. This digestion and absorption of carbohydrates and sugars can happen quickly and can happen slowly. This is also the distinction between slow carbohydrates and fast carbohydrates. The faster a carbohydrate and sugar is metabolized and absorbed by your body, the harder your pancreas has to work to produce enough insulin to lower the blood sugar level. Because if you digest and absorb a lot of carbohydrates at a super fast rate, your pancreas has to work at a super fast rate and produce a lot of insulin to neutralize that. And the opposite is also true. If you eat a carbohydrate source that is slow, then the carbohydrates and sugars are absorbed slowly into your bloodstream, and thus your pancreas has to only produce small amounts of insulin in small amounts of time to absorb these sugars and carbohydrates. Thus, the aim when eating bread is to eat carbohydrates that are as slow as possible, because this will impact your blood sugar levels, your pancreas, and thus your insulin resistance the least. Now you might wonder, what determines the absorption rate of carbohydrates and sugars from your intestines into your bloodstream? And there are a lot of factors that influence this. For example, the amount of fats a bread might contain influence the speed and the amount of carbohydrates and sugars you absorb, but also the amount of proteins that are in the bread. But the most important factor for how much carbohydrates and sugars you absorb and at what rate are the dietary fibers in a bread. The more dietary fibers a bread contains per unit of weight, the lower the amount of carbohydrates and sugars are that you absorb in the first place, and the slower the rate with which you absorb these carbohydrates and sugars. And this is all thanks to the effect fibers have in your intestines and stomach. Because as soon as dietary fibers come in contact with water, they turn the food in your stomach into a gel-like structure. And this makes it harder for carbohydrates and sugars to be absorbed, and if they get absorbed, it happens at a slower pace. Compare it a little bit to swimming into a pool filled with water and a pool filled with honey or yogurt. The stickiness of honey and yogurt is higher than water. Thus, swimming in a swimming pool filled with honey or yogurt will be way more difficult and happen at a slower rate. Exactly what is happening to carbohydrates and sugars in your bloodstream when you eat something that is full of dietary fiber. So the more fibers a product contains, the better it will be for your blood sugar and type 2 diabetes. And this is also one of the things you should optimize for when you try to improve your blood sugar or reverse your type 2 diabetes with nutrition. Whether you're eating bread or not, maximizing dietary fiber intake is one of the best things you can do for your health in general. Unfortunately, most people don't even know about dietary fibers, let alone optimize or maximize the dietary fiber intake in their nutrition. And when it comes to bread, I'm afraid most breads are unhealthy because they contain little to no dietary fiber, which for a part explains why a lot of people in the developed world and also in the less developed world have blood sugar problems and type 2 diabetes. Most of these people eat breads that are tasty, but unfortunately most tasty breads contain a lot of carbohydrates and sugars, between 60 and 70% per unit of weight, and little to no dietary fiber, which is okay if you eat it once in a while, but most people eat it on a daily basis for long periods of time, which eventually will end up helping you get high blood sugar levels and type 2 diabetes. That's why it's good to understand what categories of bread you have and which you should avoid and which you should eat. But before we do this, are you enjoying this video and want to receive more of these videos? Don't forget to give us a like and subscribe for free to this YouTube channel. That way you'll never miss a video we publish and you'll help us reach more people to help them with their blood sugar problems and type 2 diabetes. And now back to the video. When it comes to bread, there are 4 categories you should remember. Category 1, very unhealthy bread you should avoid at all times. Category 2, unhealthy bread that is marketed or promoted as healthy but is definitely unhealthy. Bread that is okay to eat. And bread that is very, very good to eat. The first category, the unhealthy breads, is filled with white breads. Any bread that is made from regular plain white flour belongs in this category and is super unhealthy for your blood sugar, your type 2 diabetes, your weight, and basically any other parameter we could measure. Because these breads contain a lot of carbohydrates and sugars, between 60 and 70%, and little to no dietary fiber, little to no healthy fats, little to no protein, little to no anything really. It's nothing more than a bunch of carbohydrates and sugars kneaded into a loaf and baked in an oven. And this also means that everything that is made from white flour, pizza dough, cake, cookies, alongside the bread, are as unhealthy as the breads themselves. Often they're more unhealthy because to cookies and cakes you add a lot of sugar. So white breads or products made from white flour should be avoided at all times because they have little to no dietary fiber and a lot of sugars and carbohydrates per unit of weight. Category 2 contains breads that have fancy names or have fancy marketing claims without being able to back them up. Usually these breads contain words as multi-grain, or they use ancient grains, or they even use food coloring to make the product darker, which should convince you that it's healthier. But 9 out of 10 times, all these fancy bread types are far from healthy. It's used to just earn more money and convince you or try to convince you that it's healthier without actually being healthier. If you pick up one of these fancy looking breads that is being heavily promoted and compare it to a regular white loaf of bread, you'll see that they don't differ that much from each other nutrition-wise. And especially if you compare it to a loaf of whole wheat bread, which brings me to the next category. Whole wheat bread is a category of bread that is okay to eat. Although it tends to contain as much carbohydrates and sugars per unit of weight as white bread, it contains a lot more dietary fibers, which makes it a lot better than white bread. Although it's not ideal for the blood sugar and type 2 diabetes, especially not if you eat it in high quantities relatively frequently, because it still contains a lot of sugars and carbohydrates, even though it contains okay amounts of dietary fibers. So if you live in a country where the best option is the whole wheat bread option, then this is definitely your best choice to make compared to all the white variations or all the white breads that are available in your country. Category 4, low carb bread. Now, depending on where you live in the world and where you live in your country, low carb bread might or might not be available. Also, you could order these breads or flours to make them yourself online. However, this is also dependent on where you live on Earth, because developed countries tend to have these products in a supermarket or online, but less developed countries, well, they tend to not have these products. And what makes low carb bread ideal are two things. They contain less carbohydrates and sugars per unit of weight, and they contain way more dietary fibers per unit of weight, which is ideal, of course, because if you want to eat bread, you want to eat the variation that contains little to no, or at least very little carbohydrates and sugars per unit of weight, and as much dietary fibers as you can fit into a loaf of low carb bread. Another option you could consider is bread made from oatmeal flour or protein bread. Protein bread is bread that tends to be very low carb because it's based around a protein, either pea protein or a protein such as pea protein. A famous brand that makes these breads is, for example, Atkins. Atkins has a whole line of high protein, low carb products, of which you could find several types of bread that are high in protein. And the advantage is that they tend to be low in carbs and okay or high in dietary fiber. But again, this last category is a bit difficult depending on where you live on Earth. If anything, please eat the whole wheat bread if you're able to eat them and find them. If you can't find whole wheat bread, then you should just stop eating bread in general, because white bread is so unhealthy and has little to no nutritional value for your body. You're making yourself sicker and worse off by eating it. And if you do have the choice, low carb bread is the best choice for everybody to eat. It has less sugars, less carbs, more dietary fibers, and the only disadvantage really is the price. It tends to be twice to sometimes 3 times as expensive as regular bread, but that shouldn't discourage you from eating it, because it's also 2 to 3 to 4 times healthier than regular bread alternatives, even compared to whole wheat bread. That's it for the video about bread. Of course, changing the type of bread you're eating is only the beginning when you want to improve your blood sugar and type 2 diabetes. To explain to you what other things you should and shouldn't be doing would make this video way too long. To help you out with this, we made a free giveaway called the Diabetes Free Secret, which is a document that teaches you the main causes of high blood sugar and type 2 diabetes and what you can do to prevent, improve, and fully reverse type 2 diabetes with a healthy diet. If you want to download this document, please follow the link in the description of this video. And if you have any questions about this video, leave a comment down below, and I'll see you in the next video.